Australians need solutions. They need to fix quarantine. We need to fix childcare costs. We need to fix aged care, which has been in crisis. And we need a plan to create more secure jobs.
Tonight the countdown is on. Treasurer Josh Frydenberg set to unveil the 2021 federal budget in just 2 days' time. Unemployment, aged care and infrastructure all set to be high on the agenda. We're speaking live and exclusively to Shadow Treasurer Jim Chalmers about what we can expect in Labor's response. It's Sunday the 9th of May. You're watching 6 News also tonight.
As China's role in the world grows and changes, the differences between our systems and the interests and values that shape those systems are becoming harder to reconcile.
Beijing suspends all economic dialogue between China and Australia in a move analysts say is likely in retaliation over the government's decision to rip up Victoria's controversial Belt and Road initiative as authorities take the unusual step of removing a post that appeared to mock India's mass cremations. And on that note, an Australian permanent resident dies in India after contracting COVID just days after the government put in place a controversial travel ban. And now it's been confirmed that repatriation flights will start in less than a week's time, the first of which set to arrive on May 15.
Let me extend my sympathy and that of the government to the family of this person and to so many families that we know are dealing with what is an extraordinary challenge.
Good evening. We're just minutes away from speaking live and exclusively to Shadow Treasurer Jim Chalmers, ahead of Labor's budget reply on Thursday. We'll also be discussing some of the other political headlines trending right now. But first tonight, in just 2 days' time, Treasurer Josh Frydenberg is set to unveil the 2021-22 federal budget. Dubbed the Jobs Budget, the focus will be on the nation's economic recovery, with unemployment, aged care and infrastructure all high on the agenda. But it's also been suggested that the Morrison government may have another priority, a federal government due in 12 months or potentially even less than that. For more, let's go live to our chief reporter, Connor Forcade. And Connor, what else do we know about the upcoming budget?
In short, Leo, jobs, jobs and jobs. Treasurer Josh Frydenberg hopes enough will be created to bring the unemployment rate from 5.6% down to something with a 4 in front of it. Jobs is the buzzword in the government's 2021 budget, which aims to restore the nation's pandemic-hit economy. And we've been promised no tax hikes or government spending cuts, thanks to the job-focused plan. A childcare package worth $1.7 billion per year will subsidise care for 400,000 families. And following a damning Royal Commission, the aged care sector is expected to receive a total of $10 billion in funding. But some say it doesn't go far enough. One report found the industry needs at least 4 times that figure. The federal government also splashing cash on infrastructure, particularly for producers in WA and the ACT's national museums and galleries. $600 million has been pledged to the government's newly established National Agency for Natural Disasters in the wake of those devastating floods. The Treasurer says providing more support for families and first home buyers is also a key objective. The low and middle income tax offset is also expected to be extended, while higher income earners will also receive a tax cut. This budget comes just 7 months after the last, which was delayed due to COVID. Given that a federal election is due next year, some say the budget may be used to gain political leverage. And in some good news, a quicker than expected economic recovery has meant the deficit will be smaller than forecast. This will be the 3rd federal budget Frydenberg has delivered, the 2nd in a pandemic. It's set to be announced on Tuesday at around 7:30.
Right, Connor Forcade live for us tonight, thank you. Meanwhile, Labor says their focus is on closing the gender pay gap and increasing pay for female workers, along with cheaper childcare for Australian families and increasing women's participation in the workforce. Anthony Albanese has called on the Treasurer to focus the budget on the aged care system following the Royal Commission's final report into the industry. Joining me now to discuss this and plenty more is the Shadow Treasurer himself, Jim Chalmers. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. What can we expect to see in Labor's budget reply next week?
Well, it's good to be with you, Leo. Obviously, we need to see what the government is proposing in the budget on Tuesday, but already we've made our priorities really clear. We want the economy to be stronger after COVID-19 than it was before COVID-19. That means investing in cleaner and cheaper energy. It means teaching and training our people more effectively. It means sorting out childcare and aged care. And it means being much better as a country at turning our Australian ideas into Australian jobs. So whatever our response will be via the leader, Anthony Albanese, on Thursday, I think people know that we're the Labor Party and we're all about jobs. We will be in the response to the budget, we will be in the election, and ideally we will be as part of an Albanese Labor government after the election too.
Now, the government obviously ended JobSeeker earlier this year, and the RBA wants Aussies to spend. How do you think Morrison's government, from what we've heard so far, and of course it is only rumours and reports, will be able to achieve this? And are Labor's plans actually any better?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I agree with the Reserve Bank and with your analysis that what we need to see is we need to see some spending in our small businesses, in our shops, in our retail outlets, because that's really in local communities one of the ways that we get the economy going. That's why we do support, tax cuts for low and middle income earners who are most likely to spend those tax cuts. We proposed the JobKeeper scheme in the first place partly for that reason. So we agree with the objective. It remains to be seen whether or not the government can get spending going again in the economy. But from our point of view, because our priority is people on middle incomes in particular, rather than people on the highest incomes, I think your viewers have a right to expect that we'll typically be better than our opponents when it comes to getting spending going in local communities. We recognise that there hasn't been enough spending. That's why small businesses and others were struggling even before coronavirus. So that needs to be a priority.
On a different topic, just quickly, the Cabinet's National Security Committee obviously signed off on that plan to begin repatriating Australians stranded in India once the temporary ban is lifted next week. Do you believe that it should have been put in place in the first place?
Well, I think it's a consequence of the fact that Australia has not, under this government, been doing well at getting people vaccinated, nor has the federal government done a good job of managing the quarantine system. And so if you take a step back for a moment, think about why so many people might be stranded, so many Australians might be stranded in India. A lot of it comes back to those two failures, the failure to vaccinate people on the time frame that was promised by the Prime Minister and the failure to take federal responsibility for quarantine. And so once those two things have gone wrong, and once you've got this really quite distressing situation in India, then that has been what has necessitated some of these drastic decisions. We think as Australians we've got a responsibility to do what we can to get people home safely, involving quarantine, involving repatriation flights and all the rest of it. Unfortunately, I think the government once again made the big announcement about banning people coming home and hadn't thought through repatriation, hadn't thought through some of these other issues. So it's a little bit messy. We genuinely want the government to get this right. There are too many anxious Australians in India and elsewhere in the world who were told that they could get home by now, and because of those two failures on vaccinations and quarantine facilities, they haven't been able to. My heart goes out to them. We need to fix this in their interests.
Is the ban racist?
Look, I'm reluctant to throw that term around. I know that people have made that allegation. I prefer to think of it as a shambles, and I think that if we had a functioning vaccination system or better functioning vaccination system, if we had functioning national quarantine facilities, all of these sorts of things, then it wouldn't be necessary. So I think it's been an issue of competence rather than necessarily that issue. But clearly, when people make that allegation, it's a very serious allegation. I'm sure they mean it when they say it. I prefer to focus on the mechanics of what's gone wrong here.
Right, now later in tonight's bulletin we're going to be talking about Beijing suspending the China-Australia Strategic Economic Dialogue. While we've got you, I want to get your thoughts on it. How do you view the Morrison's government handling of these tensions with the CCP, which have really heated up in the past 6 months?
Well, there's a couple of different issues there, Leo. I mean, obviously it's very disappointing to us as it is to the government, and I assume to the broader nation, that China's taken that decision. We would prefer that not be the case. that they go down that path. It is a disappointing path to cancel what has the potential to be a really important discussion between two countries. I think there are broader issues, though, with the way that the Morrison government has handled the China relationship. Obviously, we should always stand up for our national interests. Obviously, we should pursue our interests with all countries, including with China. But I think there has been some mismanagement here on at least two fronts. First of all, when you consider how complex this relationship is to manage and how difficult it is to manage, some of the unhelpful language, some of the exaggerated, quite provocative language has not been helpful in managing that relationship out of the government. And secondly, I think for a lot of exporters who employ a lot of Australians, there hasn't been anything from the government to help our exporters diversify, to make sure that they can ride out some of these difficult periods so that if they are selling into that big Chinese market, they've got lots of irons in the fire. They can continue to sell their goods overseas without being overly reliant. And this has been an issue for some years now, not just the last 6 months. As you rightly point out, there's been an escalation. But for some years now, there's been a concern here, and I don't think the government has acted on it. And that has consequences for our exporters, and then it has consequences for all the people that they employ.
One major issue when it comes to relations with China has to be the treatment of the Uyghur Muslims in the Xinjiang province. Both sides around the world seem to be condemning it, though the language can vary on that. Does Labor consider what is going on to be genocide?
Well, again, I'm reluctant to put labels on it, but clearly, whether it's our side of the parliament, the Labor side, or the other side, the Liberal and National side, we've raised our serious concerns about these issues which appear to be going on in China. And again, it shouldn't be beyond us to raise these issues in the appropriate forums and including in conversations with the Chinese, to raise that in a constructive way and to use temperate, sober language in describing what is clearly an unacceptable situation.
Right, and just quickly wrapping up before we let you go tonight, because I know you're very busy. Rumours about a federal election are certainly gaining a lot of traction, as we were speaking about a little earlier tonight. Now, the Liberals have been in power for almost a decade here in Australia. Is Labor still in a good position to win the next election, whether that's later this year or potentially next year?
Oh, Leo, I think it'll be incredibly tight, this next election. We'll be ready for it, whether it's in October or March or May next year. We'll be ready for it, and we're anticipating a very close contest. There are quite significant benefits to being the incumbent in times like these, but we feel like under Anthony Albanese's leadership, we've got a firmer focus on more jobs and more opportunities for more people, and we think that our policies around cleaner and cheaper energy, aged care and childcare, apprenticeships, skills and training, innovation, research and development, all of these policy areas, we think will have a more compelling offering for the Australian people. My own feeling is there's every chance, it's just as likely to be this year than next year, the election. I don't think Scott Morrison wants it to be so obvious how badly he's failing on those vaccines that you just mentioned. And so that might mean sooner rather than later, but who knows? It's up to him. He'll make a decision based on what gives him the best chance of winning the election. We'll be ready whenever it is.
Can I just ask, would you ever consider going for Labor leader, and would you want to be PM?
I want to be the Treasurer, and I want to be the Treasurer in an Albanese Labor government at the next available opportunity. It's you're right to say that we've been opposition now almost 10 years. This government is 8 years old. Unfortunately, I was elected on the first day we went into opposition. I've been in opposition ever since, and my only ambition is to be a good Treasurer in a great cabinet led by Anthony Albanese. I want that to happen sooner rather than later. There's a lot that this country needs to do in order to set itself up for the future. I feel like we're just treading water at best under the current government, so I will do whatever I can as part of a team under Anthony's leadership to win the next election and give the Australian people the government that they need and deserve.
Right, we'll leave it there. Shadow Treasurer Jim Chalmers talking to us on a wide range of political topics. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for your time, Leo. I appreciate it.
Alright, just a reminder, our special budget night coverage kicks off at 7pm Australian Eastern Standard Time this coming Tuesday. That's 5pm for those of you in the West, where we'll have special analysis and break down the key moments from the Treasurer's speech, plus plenty of details on our website as well, 6newsau.com. To other news tonight, former NRL player Tony Williams has been sacked by a US rugby club after comments he made in support of his former teammate and convicted rapist Jared Hayne. On Instagram, Williams posted 2 stories targeting Hayne's victim and questioning the woman's truthfulness as well as the justice system. His club, the New York Freedom, responded swiftly, announcing in a statement on social media that Williams' contract had been torn up, adding that they cannot control what others do, but we can control how we respond. Williams has since apologised, also on Instagram, saying in part that he's sorry for the choice of words that he used and to anyone that he has caused hurt. Earlier this week, Jared Hayne was jailed for a minimum of 3 years and 8 months after being sentenced to a total of 5 years and 9 months in prison after being convicted of 2 counts of sexual intercourse without consent over an incident in 2018. The former NRL player has now spent his first few days behind bars, but is set to challenge the sentence handed down and has lodged a notice of intention to appeal in the New South Wales Supreme Court. His legal team now has 12 months to lodge a formal appeal. The ABC says it will rely on qualified privilege and truth in its defence against a defamation case brought on by former Attorney General Christian Porter. Mr Porter says he was defamed by a story about an alleged historic rape by a serving cabinet minister because he was, quote, easily identifiable, though Porter himself was the first person to publicly identify himself following around a week of strong speculation on social media earlier this year. The national broadcaster's legal defence is now being published on the federal court website, but over 10 pages look like this, completely blacked out because Mr Porter wants the court to strike out any key evidence. The ABC has denied any defamation claims and maintains that the article did not identify the ex-AG. Returning to something we spoke to the Shadow Treasurer Jim Chalmers about earlier, Beijing has suspended all economic dialogue between China and Australia in a move analysts say is likely in retaliation over the government's decision to rip up Victoria's controversial Belt and Road initiative. It came as Chinese authorities took the unusual step of removing a social media post from a Communist Party account that appeared to mock India's mass cremations amid the country's ongoing COVID crisis. Senior reporter Darby Travers has the latest.
Beijing has announced indefinitely suspending all activities under the China-Australia Strategic Economic Dialogue amid worsening tensions between the two countries. Relations have soared ever since the federal government called for an inquiry into the origins of COVID-19, leading to trade tariffs and a war of words between the two nations. In a statement, China's National Development and Reform Commission accused Australia of unfairly targeting them, saying, quote, some government officials launched a series of measures to disrupt normal exchanges between China and Australia out of a Cold War mindset and ideological discrimination. Analysts say it may be in retaliation over the government's decision to rip up Victoria's controversial Belt and Road initiative with Beijing across the ditch. Meanwhile, Jacinda Ardern says differences between New Zealand and China are becoming harder to reconcile. The country's parliament has unanimously voted to label China's treatment of Uyghur Muslim in Xinjiang province as a severe human rights abuses, but stopped short of using the term genocide following on from objecting Ardern's ruling Labour Party.
The differences between our systems and the interests and values that shape those systems are becoming harder to reconcile. This is a challenge that we and many other countries across the Indo-Pacific region, but also in Europe and other regions, are also grappling with. As a significant power, the way that China treats its partners is important for us, and we will continue to promote the things that we believe in and support the rules-based system that underpins our collective well-being.
Now, tensions between Beijing and Manila over the South China Sea have also risen after the Philippines' Foreign Secretary tweeting that China needs to get the F out of the disputed waters. Teodoro Locsin later issued an apology to his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi, saying he is sorry for hurting his feelings but is alone. And meanwhile, Chinese authorities have taken the unusual step of removing a controversial social media post from an official Communist Party account. The post on Weibo, the China equivalent to Twitter, was translated. The image of the exhaust of a Chinese space shuttle was placed next to a photo of India's mass cremations that have been happening since the country's second wave of the virus, with the caption, "China lighting a fire versus India lighting a fire." Users on the platform have remained divided about the COVID-19 crisis overseas, with some labelling the post inappropriate, while others linked it to the ongoing border dispute.
An Australian permanent resident has died in India after contracting COVID-19 just days after the federal government put in place a controversial travel ban. Sydney woman Sonalia Ralahan says her father died on Wednesday in a small private New Delhi hospital after contracting the virus, and because of his frequent business travel, he hadn't spent enough time in Australia to qualify for official citizenship, though he had planned to apply. Ms. Ralhan says her father was panicked by the travel ban when he saw it. Speaking to 2GB's Jim Wilson, Foreign Minister Maurice Payne extended her sympathies to the family, who she did not name.
I will receive further advice from our posts in India in relation to that. But most importantly, let me extend my sympathy and that of the government to the family of this person, and to so many families that we know are dealing with what is an extraordinary challenge, with infection rates surging over 400,000 infections a day at the moment in India. There are very many families dealing with this challenge.
It has now been confirmed that repatriation flights from India will start in less than a week's time, with the first scheduled flight set to arrive into Darwin on May 15. On the morning of March 8, 2014, 227 passengers boarded Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 in Kuala Lumpur, expecting to land soon in Beijing. But the plane never arrived. And now, new research suggests that the pilot may have made a series of deliberate turns to avoid detection before the passenger plane took its final fatal course. Reporter Lincoln Holmes has the details.
In March 2014, Malaysian Airlines Flight 370, along with 239 people on board, disappeared without a trace.
First today, breaking news in aviation. 7 Australians are on board a flight that has gone missing on its way to Beijing.
Now, just over 7 years on, new research suggests that the plane's pilot deliberately made a series of turns to avoid detection before flying the doomed aircraft straight into the southern Indian Ocean. The new research indicates that the Boeing 777 crashed around 34 degrees south, but its original flight path was significantly different from earlier theories based on satellite data. Theories about the missing plane have ranged from claims of mass murder,
it would have died from lack of oxygen,
to more extreme.
The aliens had gotten it.
But there's still no confirmation, leaving the relatives of those on board feeling hopeless. As the mystery continues to deepen, Lincoln Holmes, 6 News.
A federal grand jury has indicted all four former Minneapolis police officers involved in George Floyd's arrest and death, accusing them of willfully violating the black man's constitutional rights. Derek Chauvin, the officer who had his knee on Floyd's neck and who was found guilty just a few weeks ago of murder, is charged with violating Floyd's right to be free from unreasonable seizure and unreasonable force by a police officer, while all 4 officers are charged with their failure to provide Floyd with medical care. The Justice Department also recently announced it was opening a more broader investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department to examine whether there is a pattern of unconstitutional or unlawful policing at the department. California has reported its first ever yearly population decline due to rising factors of the pandemic, immigration, high taxes, and the state's progressive politics. State officials say the population dipped almost 0.5% to under 39.5 million people from Jan 2020 to January 2021. The state's foremost populated cities, San Diego, San Jose, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, lost a combined 88,000 people, with the latter falling to an overall population of just over 3.9 million people. The news came a week after the US Census Bureau announced that California would lose a congressional seat for the first time because it grew more slowly than other states over the past 10 years. Let's face it, taxes can be confusing, and with tax season fast approaching here in Australia, many people probably need a little help when arranging their finances. So what are the key tips for those looking for a registered tax agent? Earlier I spoke to investigative journalist Tom Ravlick about what to look out for.
The Tax Practitioners Board is the authority that you need to visit online to check whether your tax agent is actually properly registered under law, so that you know you're dealing with someone that is reputable and also is appropriately registered and monitored by the Tax Practitioners Board. That website is tpb.gov.au. There's a searchable register on that website that allows you to search up the names of various tax agents and tax practices that are required to be registered under law. Make sure you check whether the firm or the people you're using to do your tax return are registered, and that is a guarantee that you're able to take a complaint to the Tax Practitioners Board if something goes wrong, but it is also an indicator that you're dealing with someone that is appropriately trained.
A 9-year-old boy has been left unharmed after managing to jump onto a moving conveyor belt at an airport in the US. CCTV shows the boy sitting on the belt and being carried through a small tunnel that leads to a baggage sorting area, with police able to find him within just 4 minutes and then return him to his parents. The incident happened at the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, with the airport now saying they are investigating what happened and said it would work with Delta Airlines to prevent any other similar incidents from happening. A New Zealand man has been threatened with prosecution over his penis pothole drawings. In 2018, road safety campaigner Jeff Upson drew 2 green and pink neon penises to identify where potholes are on the road. But now the New Zealand Herald reports that Auckland Transport has promised to take up legal action against Mr Upson following a complaint over his graffiti, which the council says poses a safety risk and distraction to drivers, as well as being dangerous to carry out. It's now estimated over 100 penises have been drawn to date. A pretty ballsy move there. And tomorrow's forecast right across the country. Brisbane partly cloudy, a top of 27, 23 in Sydney, 17 in the nation's capital, 15 in rain in Melbourne, 14 in Hobart, 17 in Adelaide, 26 in Alice Springs, 24 and cloudy in Perth, and in Darwin a warm top of 34. And finally tonight, just another quick reminder of our special budget night coverage next week. It all kicks off at 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time this coming Tuesday. That's 6:30 p.m. for those of you in South Australia, 5 p.m. for those in the West. We'll have special coverage and break down the key moments from the Treasurer's speech, what it means for your money, and answer all your questions. And that is 6 News for this Sunday evening. Happy Mother's Day as well for all the mums out there, including mine. Thank you so much for doing all this hair each night, and it really makes the presentation of each bulletin just that little better. You can stay up to date with the latest news by heading to our website 6newsau.com and by following us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok and Lit. Just search 6newsau to find us. I'm Lena Puglisi. Thanks for your company. Good night.